Most players on Clash Royale keep thinking that if they make a better deck, they'll get more wins. But what they forget is that they don't even have the basics down when countering other players. There are so many players running around with a 2.6 Hog Cycle or an Icebow deck that they copied from the internet, but then getting absolutely demolished because they just aren't able to counter a good tank deck or get baited every single time with log bait. Today, we're fixing that. We're breaking down how to counter every single win condition in Clash Royale. Now, for those of you who are just getting started with the game, a win condition is basically any card that directly targets the enemy towers, and something that you can use to get consistent damage. The most basic win conditions, in my opinion, are cards like Golem or Lava Hound, which are what I like to call tank win conditions. The main thing with these cards is that they need a ton of elixir to really get going. For example, one of the most famous tank win conditions is Golem, paired with other cards like Night Witch, Evolve Baby Dragon, Elixir Pump, Barbarian Barrel, Tornado, Mega Minion, and Evolve Valkyrie to stall and build up elixir. For a proper push with the Golem, you need the 8 elixir needed to play the Golem itself, along with the Baby Dragon to make sure it doesn't get swarmed and killed off, for a total of 12 to 14 elixir. But that's exactly where you can crush most of these decks. Especially during single elixir, if you can keep the pressure high and constantly attack their towers, they just don't have the elixir to counter push. Most tank-based win conditions have to ignore some chip damage so they can build up their elixir, which means decks that have huge chip damage, like a Hog Rider deck, can be their kryptonite. And when it comes to specific cards, there are some things that you gotta watch out for. For defending against Golem, some swarms like a skeleton army get destroyed when the Golem splits into 2, so an Inferno Tower or distracting the Golem with a building while using air units on it gets much better results. Also, in general, you need to punish Golem as much as possible, so if, for example, they put a Golem in the right lane, you instantly put your Hog down on the left to get some chip damage. Moving on to the Giant, it's much weaker on its own and is basically dependent on the support cards behind it. So your best bet is to use a building like a cannon to distract the Giant, and then take out the support cards as fast as you can. On the other hand, when it comes to the Electro Giant, buildings still work, and spawner buildings are your best bet, but you could also go with cards like the P.E.K.K.A. or Mini P.E.K.K.A. to counter it easily. And while the Electro Giant destroys most swarms, some cards like Royal Recruits and Barbarians are still good picks, since they can tank all the damage he puts out. But personally, the Royal Giant has to be the most unique Giant character in the game, because he can actually hit towers from afar. While he can be annoying to deal with, P.E.K.K.A., Mini P.E.K.K.A., and swarms like Skeleton Army can take him out before he does too much damage. You could also try sending your troops in early instead of waiting for him to be well inside your territory, like you would with other giants, so you can minimize the damage your tower takes. I only have 2 more cards that I see used a lot as tanks. There's Goblin Giant and Sparky. For Goblin Giant, most of the same strategies that we've discussed so far get the job done. Target the support cards, use Swarms or Inferno Tower, and if you have an Elixir lead, punish their pushes by going in the opposite lane. When it comes to Sparky, you really only need cards like Ice Wizard, Electro Wizard, Zap, Freeze, or the other dozen cards that can interrupt a charging Sparky. It has much lower health too, so you can take it down with a rocket if it already has a charge. One last thing you could do is bait out the attack using a small card like Spirits or Skeletons, and then you can destroy the Sparky using other cards while it charges. But while all of these tank win conditions are great in their own right, there is one combination of 2 tank win conditions that absolutely overwhelms most players, and that's Lavaloon, a combination of the Lava Hound and Balloon, and probably one of the most annoying decks to deal with. Both these cards are often used together, so that's why we're going to talk about how to counter both at the same time. Now, the first thing you need to keep in mind is to completely ignore the Lava Hound. The entire strategy behind Lavaloon is that you send the Lava Hound first, let it soak up all the damage, and you put high damaging units behind it. Lava Hound only does 60 damage per second at level 15, compared to a Balloon, which does 465 damage. So your entire strategy is to ignore the Lava Hound, let it connect with your Princess Towers, and instead put down cards like Wizard, Firecracker, or Executioner to get some damage on the Lava Hound while completely destroying all the support cards behind it. So with a couple of good splash damage cards, especially ones that can hit the ground and the air, you will be able to destroy any offense while getting a strong elixir lead to counter push. The last thing you have to watch out for is the Lava Pups, which do double the damage of the Lava Hound but have very little health. If you arrow them right when the Lava Hound dies, or if your splash damage card is still alive, you should be able to destroy them without much difficulty. But if we're talking about annoying cards, then we need to talk about Graveyard. Graveyard Freeze, Graveyard Giant, and Graveyard Poison are all really annoying to deal with. But the key to countering Graveyard is first knowing what variant your opponent is using, and then making sure to play your cards properly. Placement really matters when it comes to the normal Graveyard, and if you place them right, the basic skeletons, goblins, or bats can all trade positively. For Graveyard Poison, a Valkyrie works perfectly, and the same with Graveyard Giant. You can put down a Valkyrie to destroy Graveyard and another card to deal damage to the Giant, and you can defend perfectly while getting an elixir lead. Last, but definitely not least, Graveyard Freeze can be really annoying to deal with, since it can just freeze whatever you put down to counter, but as long as you have a decent elixir cost deck, you can follow up a Valkyrie with goblins or something similar to keep the skeletons off your tower. Overall, as long as you have a couple counters and track when your opponent has his graveyard combo ready, you should be able to destroy him no problem. But if there's one thing that's more annoying than a bunch of skeletons, it's the Miner. Miner and other chip damage cards like Wall Breakers, Goblin Barrel, Royal Hogs, and Skeleton Barrel are all focused on having small pushes where they can get a couple hundred damage in, and over time it really adds up. But you can counter them the same way you would counter Graveyard. Know the win condition your opponent is running, always have your counters ready, and once you get an elixir lead or your opponent makes a mistake, punish him by getting high damage on his towers. With Miner, cards like Knight, Mini P.E.K.K.A, and Guards all work fairly well. But if you're confident in your placement, Ice Spirit and Skeletons can always trade positively with Miner. When it comes to Wall Breakers, you just have to be fast enough to react and put something down to burst it quickly. If your opponent is an annoying little kid who splits his Wall Breakers, then you can counter it perfectly by splitting a Swarm card like Skeleton Army so it can cover both towers. The standard Log, Zap, and Giant Snowball all work if they're in the same lane, and these same spells are going to be your counter for their Goblin Barrel or Skeleton Barrel. There are also 3 Musketeers and Royal Hogs, who also get split into 2 lanes to put pressure on both sides at the same time. But the same counters of cards like Mini P.E.K.K.A or spells like Giant Snowball work pretty well, and you could even use swarms like Barbarians to counter them. While these cards can be overwhelming to deal with sometimes, as long as you stay aware and get your counters up, there's really nothing they can do except lose. But if there are any win conditions that involve being patient and tracking your opponent's cards too far, then it's definitely the 2 siege win conditions. Mortar and Expo, 2 of the worst cards to deal with in Clash Royale. They can hit your tower from afar, do pretty high damage, and can be insanely hard to destroy if your opponent knows how to defend. But there are a few things you can do to counter a siege deck. The key to understanding siege win conditions is that their weaknesses are pretty much the same as beatdown win conditions, except this time, instead of it being a mobile tank, it's a faraway building. So all the strategies we used for the tank win conditions also apply here. If you can consistently apply pressure and get a huge elixir lead, then they just don't have the elixir needed to put down an Expo and some support troops. And even if they manage to get enough elixir to put everything down, you can still use the old reliable strategy of targeting and destroying the supports first, and then swarming the building. But if you're the kind of person who actually likes playing a siege win condition, then the next type of win conditions are probably your worst nightmares. The way bridge spam conditions like Battle Ram, Hog Rider, and Ram Rider work is by using really high pressure cards to constantly force you to defend and do chip damage to you consistently until you get to the point where they take your tower and win the game. So the best way to counter these decks is to have patience. Don't put your strong cards down immediately or try to push. Instead, you gotta wait for them to attack, defend well, and get a small elixir lead. Also, when you're up against bridge spam, you really gotta keep track of your opponent's win conditions and only push them when you know they can't punish you easily for it. So, as long as you get an elixir lead, and when they're at their weakest, push them hard, they will have to use all their elixir to defend you, allowing you even more opportunities for attack. And that brings us to the last type of win conditions, the spell cycle win conditions. This includes stuff like the rocket, fireball, etc., being used to do damage to your towers. Mostly, this is your secondary win condition if, let's say, you're running a siege deck and your opponent has bridge spam. So instead of trying to make your deck work where it's really weak, you focus on using all your cards to support rocket. But it's also one of the weakest win conditions, since not only is it completely nerfed if you're running a monk, but also it only works if your opponent has done more damage to your towers. If let's say your towers have 3,000 health and their tower only has 2,000 health, both of you can rocket each other at the same time, and they can even get an extra rocket on you, but you'd still come out on top. So with these kinds of win conditions, as long as you stick to your strategy and do consistent damage, you can easily win the game. So now that you know how to counter every single win condition in the game, How much are you going to grind in Clash Royale, and how many trophies are you trying to reach? And if this guide helped you figure out how to counter that one card that had been destroying you, hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth strategy guides. Thanks for watching.